Welcome to TRS Clips, where you'll find happiness through your own curiosity.
When Islam, began to make inroads throughout the world, we were also kind of complacent in a sense.
Like, didn't take action
We
to
didn't
defend.
take them too seriously
Okay.
in that sense. Plus, we didn't actually, Hindu kings back then, fail to study the real nature of this new invader.
So you're saying the invaders before we
before-
had
before.
already defeated, so we assume that this is one more external
One
invader.
more external invader who was
They-
also like them.
Okay.
And a lot of those pre-Islamic invaders were assimilated into Hindu society.
Like the Huns and
Hunas, Shakas,
Okay.
Greeks and all that. So we also thought this was something similar to that. And realistically, they didn't have it very easy. Islamic invaders from to reach Delhi, from Ghazni to Delhi or from Sindh to Delhi. Sindh is the starting point. So when Qasim comes in, from Qasim's raid into Sindh in 712, and he leaves in 715. From then to establishing a firm foothold in Delhi, it took about 320 years. Why? Because Hindus never gave up fighting. They didn't have it easy, unlike, in other parts of the world. So within 40 years after, Muhammad died, all of Egypt was swallowed by Islam, and, they touched the borders of Spain. Then, they were ravaging Europe. So entire Middle East was, conquered by Islam within 40 years of Prophet Muhammad's death. From Muhammad bin Qasim's maiden raid into Sindh, till the time that Muslims established a political foothold in Delhi, it took about 320 years, and throughout that, they met with fierce resistance at every step. Now think about this. After Qasim, Muhammad bin Qasim was an Arab Muslim.
you'll also have to give context on him. Who was he? Where did he come from?
Okay.
And roughly what year?
Okay. So Qasim came into India. He raided India in 712 CE, and he was in India for about 3 years, less than 3 years. Then he goes back to Iraq, Baghdad.
Modern day Iraq.
Baghdad. So Baghdad at that time was one of the greatest centers, or one of the greatest hubs of the rapidly rising Muslim political power in that belt, that region of the world. So it was also known as the global hub of Islamic culture at that time. And it retained its preeminence for about 2 or 3 centuries, after which Genghis Khan comes. And then he completely devastates Baghdad. And later, Genghis Khan still has, he arouses a lot of hatred even today in the Muslim world. At the time when, they thought that Islam would take over the whole world, this fellow comes, short man, with a huge army of Mongols, and devastates and pretty much decimates whatever territories that Islam had conquered. And the Mongols go all the way up to Egypt also. That's another story. And his grandson, another Mongol named Hulagu Khan, he repeats the same thing 2 generations or 3 generations later.
Sacks Baghdad
again. In fact, the decimation is so brutal that there are graphic descriptions which I can't, repeat in this show.
You can actually.
I can. Okay, yeah. Fine. The whole city is razed. Forts are burned down. Men, women, children, infants, they are all... basically, what the Mongols do is that they gave the taste of what Islam had done to them in a much more ferocious manner.
One second, when did Islam... when Genghis Khan and...
Genghis Khan came around early 12th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there was few battles that the Muslim world won against the Mongols.
No, before that. before that, in Central Asia, Islam had touched all the way till Central Asia.
Okay.
So Afghanistan and Upar, that Chinese region, which is where you still find, this Muslim Uyghur province in China. The Muslims are in substantial numbers. It dates back all this to this period. Anyway, so that's why I say we have to read history.
Sure.
To understand the present and future. Anyway, so that happens. And Qasim, he's called back to Baghdad, and, pretty much the regime changes there in Baghdad. Incidentally, Muhammad bin Qasim, he's deputed to invade India by his uncle and father-in-law. Okay, jo chacha bolte hain na, he's also his father-in-law. And he says, you have to invade Hind. I'm giving you a fleet of 6,000 boats, warships, and, go. That's how it begins. And he goes back there, but by then, the regime has changed in Baghdad, and his uncle has been deposed and killed. And the hostile party, the person who was deposed, Al-Hajjaj, that's Qasim's uncle's name. That fellow is in power. So Qasim is recalled there. He is imprisoned. He's skinned alive and killed in a gruesome manner. So this kind of warfare, this kind of politics is unknown to India until that time. This kind of, all-out warfare where there are no rules but only victory at any cost. So he goes back there. Between him and Mahmud of Ghazni, there is a gap of about 2.5 centuries. So 715 is when Qasim goes back to Baghdad, and 1000 CE is when Mahmud comes into India. He begins his first raid.
Okay.
So you see about 2.5 centuries of gap.
Parallelly, if we speak about what's happening in India at this time, or even if we kind of precede this period, roughly when was Ashoka and Chandragupta?
Oh, this is way back, yeah. Ashoka, they lived BCE,
Okay.
what is known as BC, before Christ.
Okay.
Now it's called BCE, meaning before Common Era.
So I'm painting that whole phase from Chandragupta and Ashoka up till the point that we've reached in
Up
our
till
timeline.
Qasim is about 1,500 years.
Wow. Okay. But in this whole 1500-year period, from this whole Ashoka period, we hear about Kalinga War and how that war was so brutal that it changed Ashoka's mindset and all. We've had someone come on the show and say that, no, actually that's a whole other conversation about just Ashoka. But in this whole 1500-year period, there were no civil wars in India, or there weren't warring factions or anything?
Okay. So when you say civil wars, it's a very good question, Ranveer. When you say civil war and fractional war or factional war, a civil war, what is a civil war? It is the breakdown of government. Right? Basically, a civil war is anarchy. Depending on the intensity, depending on the duration, it is basically anarchy. The degrees might vary. So this is why the existence of a government is so vital in any civilization, right? When government breaks down, or when the government is so weak that the citizens, they take the law into their own hands and say, look, we don't need you. That is when a civil war also happens, all right? Now, in the technical sense of the word, as we understand civil war as anarchy, it never existed in India, in Indian history.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Let's rewrite it as state versus state wars.
Okay, so what you're talking about is, this question comes from what is known as the modern democratic mind. State versus state. You're talking about a period of entirely composed of monarchies, of rulers, kings. Technically, in a democracy, there is no king. There is an elected representative, right? He's a first among equals. He becomes a PM and things like that. Now, for this mind, to understand how a monarchy operates is very, very hard, if not impossible.
Okay. See, I'll tell you where I'm getting with this. We're talking about that Islamic invasion point. My original question was, what went wrong in India for those invasions to become successful over time? Because the narratives I've got on the show are that it became a little you versus me even then. And this is with Abhijit Chavda, with a bunch of the other historians that we've spoken about. There was some lack of unity, say, between the Rajputs and whoever was ruling in Madhya Pradesh or Maharashtra or the rest of the country. There was some lack of unity, possibly because of this whole narrative about hard men build soft times build soft men, and soft men build hard times. So we're at that hard times point when we're talking about India getting invaded, which is preceded by soft men. Which
No. I don't know where you're getting this from, but it
like
didn't,
every historian on the show has said this.
No, it didn't work quite like that. There are many reasons for this.
Okay.
I think I mentioned about the complacency of Hindu kings.
Yeah, so soft men. This is what I'm talking about.
Not even soft men. So the man who was responsible for allowing Qasim to succeed was a Hindu king named Raja Dahir. He was ruling in the Makran coast, which is Makran is now in Pakistan.
Karachi.
His capital was a city named Debal. So this is where he entered. All the invasions prior to Qasim had taken place through the land route, through the mountain passes in Afghanistan, all that. And they were easily beaten back. The terrain is so difficult, it is so tough. And you don't know, the invaders didn't know the lay of the land, so to speak, then the weather and preparedness, a lot of things. So they were beaten back. 4 or 6 invasions, attempts like that were beaten back. So Hajjaj said, okay, let's try the sea route this time. And all the 4 invasions before that, Dahir had repulsed them. So this time, this fellow comes with an even better preparedness, with a larger force, and Dahir by then has become complacent. That is one factor. The second factor were the Buddhists, a section of Buddhists, not all of them, a section of Buddhists who were carrying out, who were passing on intelligence about Dahir to Al-Hajjaj and his officers there and his spies. That, we don't want to live under this fellow. There is one theory that Dahir was an oppressive person, but that theory finds not much support in through evidence. But whatever, this is the Buddhist correspondence, their what is known as backstabbing, supplying valuable intelligence. It is a big factor, actually. It is a big factor.
As in the Buddhists,
yeah,
facilitated the entry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. By passing on information. I mean, they didn't open the gates or whatever, but what does an invader look like, look for? He wants to know geography. He wants to know the troop strength of his victim. He wants to know the local conditions. He wants to know where they can camp. All these real world things. And then obviously on the military side, he wants to know the vulnerabilities.
All right.
Where are the vulnerable points? What is the public opinion about this king? These are all, you act on this intelligence. Even today, that is what happens in diplomacy and things like that.
Okay.
So combined factors plus Dahir's own complacency, he was so foolish that he allowed Muhammad bin Qasim to pitch his tent 60 kilometers away or 60 miles away or quite close to his fortress. Who does this? There's overconfidence कि पहले इसको हराया था अब भी हरा सकते हैं.
This is what I'm asking.
Yes.
Like in terms of what did those soft men do to...
No, if he was a soft man, that is what I'm saying. If he was a soft man, he wouldn't have repulsed the Arabic invasions, 4 times. Huh? एक overconfidence आता है कि, I am so tough, I'm so strong, nobody can defeat me.
I think hard men would just be invincible to like invasions.
Perhaps, yeah. Perhaps.
But my question is, what led to him becoming a soft man? Is it because India was so rich that it was that whole nepotism problem that rich kids can't play the game as well?
No. You can't use this logic here. It's simply a case of complacency, Ranveer.
I would still categorize complacency also as rich kid problems.
No, okay, rich kid problem is not complacency. The guy who goes up, the hard way. Example, forget Dahir. Take an example, you grow up from the scratch, you build your own life, reach a certain stage of what you call invincibility. And all along you see both victory and defeat, but then you get to that point because your victories have been greater than your defeats. And even at that point, you're continuously challenged, and there is a saying, right? You have to run twice as fast to remain in the same place.
Okay.
So you're used to, dealing with difficulty and, beating back your opponents. So that breeds a certain sense of confidence in what you call as these hard men. But what is the line? What is a thin line that separates confidence from overconfidence?
You tell me.
No, the person who has understood that line would never know defeat. No.
Okay. Maybe so breaking away from this Dahir king, I'm also asking a more generalized question about all of our country. Like, how did so much of the country, especially North India, get taken over? Was it repeats of the same King Dahir situation where there was traitors, where there was, say again, rich kid kings, kings who had become old or complacent, etc.? Or was there more to it?
Yes, all of the above.
All these factors came together.
All of the above, but they didn't come together. You have to take these things case by case. Okay. Dahir was complacent. That is one thing. Now, say in the case of Mahmud's raid of Somnath, right? It was a very prosperous and a very strong city, but it was unguarded. A bunch of citizens and a few soldiers were protecting Somnath. That's all it was it was pretty much a cakewalk for Mahmud in that sense. Then, because right in the neighborhood, you had an extraordinarily powerful king called Paramara Bhoja. In fact, after Mahmud demolished Somnath and looted the whole, plundered the whole place, he was scared of the confederacy of Paramara Bhoja. So he had to take a desert route and return to Ghazni after a lot of hardship. So what prevented? The question is, what allowed Mahmud to even reach all the way till Somnath in the first place? Bhoja was, by any standard, by any measure, an extremely powerful king compared to Mahmud. Complacency, not for the lack of strength or will. Negligence.
Yeah.
And in case of Muhammad Ghori, a traitor, it was a victory of perfidy.
Okay.
And then with a lot of other things, internal traitors, other Hindu kings, lack of unity in facing a common alien enemy. So a lot of these factors, like you said.
Few things. One, I actually want to hear a little more details about Muhammad of Ghazni and Muhammad of Ghori separately. So we'll cover those stories as well.
Okay.
Secondly, the one thing I know about history is that it repeats itself.
Yes.
And I think the British knew that as well. They had someone telling them that, listen, this country has been invaded because divide and rule worked back then also. So you guys should just enhance that.
I wouldn't quite put it that way, but roughly speaking, in a sense, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Like there was possibly a lack of unity back then. If all those state kings or kings from different tribes, etc., regions would have come together, maybe we would have been able to put up a fight.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, individual kings put up fight together. So there is, the clearest way to explain this. There are two terms in our languages. एक है राष्ट्र, right? दूसरा है देशा. Rashtra is what is India. The whole of India as one indivisible political, social, cultural unit. Okay, that is Rashtra. Rashtra is this indivisible political, cultural unit called India. There is Desha, for example, Maratha Desha, Karnataka Desha, which is today's Karnataka, Gurjar Desha, which is Gujarat. So Kalinga Desha, Odisha, parts of that, Vanga Desha, Anga, like that. So these are regions which were also political dominions, within the larger Rashtra,
Empire.
not an empire, country, nation.
Okay.
India is a nation. These are all regions which have independent kings ruling, some parts of it.
What's uniting them?
Absolute monarchical control. And so, wars are fought between them for expanding the boundaries of their respective desha. And so we never lost sight of that. But what happened over the period is what I call the loss of the Aryavarta consciousness.
Do you think that's what united all these guys?
Which one?
The Aryavarta
consciousness. Yes.
Is what kept everyone together.
Okay. So they would not interfere. They recognize the suzerainty of the other king. Okay, say you are a Chola monarch. All right, I'm a Chalukya monarch. We have clear boundaries. And the only time we go to war is when you encroach my boundaries or vice versa. Okay, or there is some kind of a skirmish and, the king has to intervene. Or the other way is to declare a Digvijaya, a war of expansion, territorial conquest.
As in there were rules related to war.
Very codified, very logical codified rules related.
All of what we would term as Akhand Bharat today followed back then. Everyone had rules related to war and there was a code of conduct.
There was a code of conduct. Now, here is another data point that will help you understand this much better. Now, you had different political kingdoms, entities, Chola and, say, Pallava, within the same geographical unit, all right? During peacetime, I am your enemy, you are my enemy, all right? Now, Reliance has a plant in my kingdom. And he also wants to set up a plant in your kingdom. He has to obviously take permission from me, which I will grant freely. So will you. The rivalry is purely political between you and me, between our armies, not the rest of the society. Sure. Not the people, who follow different sects, not the businessmen who want to carry on trade and establish factories and things like that. The war is enmities only between you and me. It is political. These are some of the, when you think about it, it's made for a lot of political stability. Although you had, these separate kingdoms, but overall there was stability in society, culture, things like that. Now, I'll take another random example. There's one businessman called Kunjanambi Shetty. He was basically, his native was somewhere in Kerala. And he had business, he was running a mobile business, not mobile phone, but caravan type of business, dealing in precious metals and gems and pearls, things like that. So he had extensive shopping outlets, establishments, basically in the Hoysala kingdom, in the Sevuna kingdom or Yadava kingdom, which is in Devagiri, Daulatabad, there with that kingdom, with the Pandya kingdom. So 3 or 4 kingdoms, he had free passage. And all the kings out there, they treated him as an honored guest because he contributed to their economy.
God. Let's go back to the
Let's go back to that. So this is the, sorry, just digress
chill.
So this was the state of the thing. But the moment they lost this Aryavarta consciousness and began squabbling with each other for no reason, for very silly reasons, as water sharing or some farmer, some zamindar, he set off his cows to graze into the enemy land. Iske liye, it's a lot of petty reasons they began to fight with each other. And this factor of revenge, ki mere baap ko isne mara, iske bete ko main marunga. So many wars were fought just like that.
Rich kid problems.
So this kind of nonsense kept on. Then over the period, they lost sight of this Aryavarta consciousness.
Unity.
So they lost sight of this. Second was the disappearance of what I call, this Samrat or Chakravarti. So Chandragupta Maurya, he was the first Chakravarti in that sense. and all the way up to the Gupta dynasty. The end of Gupta dynasty pretty much finished it off. That changed our history. It made India vulnerable to that extent. And with the fall of Harshavardhana, of Kanyakubja, Kanauj, that put an end to this concept of Samrat, like a man who single-handedly rules. With that, you had these independent, all the vassals under Harshavardhana, all the vassals began to declare independence. And then they began to, fight with each other to expand their kingdom or all kinds of reasons.
Would you like to go back to the timeline?
Yeah, so where had we left this thing? With the Aryavarta consciousness. Yeah. So when they lost that, you lose a certain sense of vitality, and then, all this skirmishes kept happening. You win some, you lose some, but what they had not, which has been, I think, one of the greatest failure on the Hindu society community, was the failure to study the core doctrines of Islam. It is one thing to invade, not that, wars weren't happening, like I said, with mutually warring Hindu kings. But none of them destroyed temples. None of them slaughtered cows. None of them had this practice of taking women and children as slaves. Compulsory, then this forced conversions. So slave taking of even infants was a practice that was non-existent in India until Islam came. So you see the kind of disruption that happens, social, cultural disruption that happens, and a lot of valuable things that are lost to your civilization irretrievably. So when Mahmud, plundered and went on a series of raids into India multiple times, he took so many slaves, men, women, and children, so many slaves. Back then, the world had, the medieval world had several lucrative slave trade markets, most notably in the Arabian Peninsula. In Cairo was a big slave market. I think one of the cities in Spain or Belgium that had that belt. That was a very flourishing slave trade market. Turkey was a huge slave trade market. And later Lahore was also one of the world's largest slave trade markets, continuously for about 400 years.
Damn. What's the period?
All right. Yeah.
Like
400 years, let's say roughly starting from, why 400? Even 600 years actually. Till Aurangzeb's time, or at least till Shah Jahan's time, predated by 500 years or so. 500, 600 years.
And like the slaves would be sourced from all of India.
All of India. Every war in which a Muslim king, a Muslim raider or conqueror became successful would be accompanied by industrial scale slave taking. Men, able-bodied men, women and children, including infants. Okay, and they would be transferred. So when Mahmud took so many slaves, he got letters from merchants, slave merchants from Baghdad, for example. They wrote to him saying that, look, you're single-handedly destroying the market here with your oversupply of slaves from Hindustan. That is when, Mahmud said, okay, fine, I won't send any more slaves. So who were these slaves? Imagine somebody, the CEO of, say, one of the Tata group of companies. Imagine his wealth, his net worth, his lifestyle, his status in the society. Imagine him being bound and fettered in chains and being sold as a commodity in a market.
Yeah, I'd also recommend
this
everyone
is a disruption.
Watch a movie called 12 Years a Slave. Have you seen this?
Yes.
It's such a psychologically challenging movie.
Very disturbing.
You understand the brutal truths about slavery, as well as the brutal truths about human trafficking, which unfortunately happen even today.
Even today it happens. Yeah. But not on the scale. See, slavery was legal back then. In both Europe and the Islamic world, it was legal.
Okay.
Even in America, which is why civil war happened. So anyway, now this disruption This kind of thing never happened in wars between two Hindu kings.
Got it.
Only soldiers would fight. And they had well-defined rules, a code of honor, a code of war ethics, in which women, children cannot be used as shields. They cannot be used as bait in order to, stop the enemy. You cannot kill cows. You cannot kill farmers, like, non-combatants. All the UN Charter of War and all that thing is some international consensus. All these were there in existence from 5,000-6,000 years here.
Okay. Let's talk about the timeline again.
So this happened. And this was a new warfare which, and think of the disruption that has occurred in one way. Now, prior to these Islamic invasions, none of the alien invaders who had come had engaged in this kind of behavior. So this was completely new. The destruction, disruption, slave taking, all these things, right? That fundamentally altered our society and the course of our history. And yes, the factors are there, disunity among Hindu kings. This, I think that we have covered that ground already. And so as the weakening of the Aryavarta consciousness, eventually you lose it, then it is as good as a free-for-all, which also paved the way for the long-lasting Mughal rule.
Okay. Yeah. You know what I will say though? I think my generation, at least I would like to believe this, we are the Virat Kohli generation. Okay. Which is a little bolder, a little more aggressive, a little more with a chase for that ultimate excellence and perfection. And that's not to say that your generation is not. It's just that we've been brought up with information around us, which leads to many psychological problems. Overthinking is just the base level of it. What you said, lack of patience, lack of commitment, all that's there. But my hope is that all you and me can do for future Indians is talk, debate, put out the truth, and do our role. We've dedicated our life to studying. You've studied in your own way. I've studied in my own way. All we can do is talk. I don't think we should be even relying on the government to change certain things about education.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
it's just the responsible thing to do.
I guess so. I don't know.
Hey, if you enjoyed today's clip, make sure you check out all the other clips we've uploaded on this channel. You'll find a clip related to almost every single topic as long as you're willing to search for it.